Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Food is Life, a real talk show, a project of Meal Exchange. I'm your host, Raheen Khan, and I'm excited today to talk to you about, we always think about, in the last few episodes, we've talked really a lot about, what are the challenges that are happening with the food system. We've had a chance to talk about some of the work Meal Exchange is doing and some of the work that other organizations are currently doing to start to really, pivot during this time of pandemic. But I'm excited to share with you a conversation today with our founder, Rahul Raj, who started Meal Exchange, and to really go back to the story of how it all began. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Rahul here. Welcome, Rahul, to the show today.
Thanks so much, Farheen. Delighted to be here.
That's great. So let me do a proper introduction here of Rahul, and then we'll get started into the conversation. So Rahul, you are the founder and the CMO of Five and Vine, and before that, you work on challenger brands and accelerating their growth, which is pretty cool. You've worked at Ecobee, you've been at Walmart.com, you've received several accolades for the work that you've done, and you founded Meal Exchange, which is an incredible charity, which has received recognition in Time Magazine as being revolutionary, and we've raised over $5 million so far to feed those in need. So welcome so much to the show today.
Thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here and have this conversation with you.
That's great. So Rahul, tell us. Let's get right into it. Most people at 17 aren't thinking about starting a charity. So maybe you can tell us, what was it that you were, how did this all begin?
Sure. Well, the starting point is that's not at all what I was thinking about either. It just sometimes you stumble into things in life, whether it's well-intentioned or not. And that was definitely the case with me. So I started university a little bit earlier. So I started at 17, and entering into my first year of university, I was put in a dormitory, which was lovely. But despite there being a variety of dorms across campus, I was assigned to the football dorm, which, as you can tell through video from my massive stature, that made complete sense. So unfortunately, I was probably closer in size to a football than I was to the player. And so there was a huge disconnect there. And I also was stuck with this very outsized meal plan. And I just found it didn't make sense. So I was a business student. I'm reasonably logical. And I was like, well, I don't wear double XL clothes. I shouldn't have a double XL meal plan. So I went to the university and said, this just doesn't make sense. And you guys are a business school. You should know this. This isn't a one size fits all scenario. I know I'm not going to eat it. You haven't purchased the food for my time in March or April or May of next year. Just give me some of my money back and let me spend less. And they said, nice try. That's not the way things work.
Right.
And so that was a bit disheartening. But since I had all of this extra money, I thought, well, what's the best thing that I can do with it? I didn't want a lifetime supply of Tic Tacs. I didn't need, my dorm room filled with ramen noodles. And so the initial idea was kind of based on this premise of sidewalk profits. So this premise that everyone has a story, and perhaps what I could do is just treat people to a meal that were like those individuals that were in need, learn about their story, and grow and develop as a human being by expanding my sense of what the human experience is like. And so I did that once or twice. But given that I had like a bunch of volunteer opportunities and a bunch of academic responsibilities, my ability to do that at scale was really limited. And nor was it necessarily something that my friends found particularly
Mm-hmm.
interesting. But what we could do is I could use up more of that money in bulk if I were to buy food for those that couldn't afford it, but that were associated with an organization like a
Mm-hmm.
women's shelter or you know, a food bank or something along those lines. And that's
Right.
really where the light bulb went out, or
Mm-hmm.
went on rather. And it's very much connected to my work currently, but it's this premise of scale, right? So I guess there's two components to it. The first one being um, opportunity. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not that I started out trying to establish a charity. I started out with a problem, right? And the problem was an outsized meal plan. Then the
Yes.
second component is what's the best way that I could connect that problem with a solution. So I had an outsized meal plan, and there was a number of people in our community that didn't have enough food to eat.
Right.
Then the third component was, okay, now that I have this sense of like how the problem connects with the solution, how can
Mm-hmm.
I do it at scale? And so for
Right.
me, it was buying food in bulk. And then the next layer up was realizing that I'm not alone with that particular challenge. I'm not the only one
Mm-hmm.
that has excess money on their meal plan. So what if
Right.
I enabled my peer group to also donate, and then we deliver to those organizations? And so that's where another sort of layer of the scale piece came in.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
what we discovered through this process is that um, many of these organizations already get a lot of canned food, right? They already get
Right.
a lot of non-perishable or shelf-stable food.
Mm-hmm.
What could we uniquely do that others perhaps didn't have the ability to do? And then it sort of clued in that, oh, well, we're actually using money to buy food.
Right.
So if we figure out what the deficiencies are, perhaps we could address those deficiencies. And so I started to call the organizations to learn, who do you service and what
Mm-hmm.
needs are being unmet. And through those discovery calls, I learned that there's a lot of individuals that have dietary needs that aren't because they're picky, but it's because
Mm-hmm.
of religion or it's because of their physiology. So if you
Mm-hmm.
are Muslim or Jewish and you require halal food, that is not just something you wake up choosing. It's not like I prefer salt and vinegar chips versus barbecue chips. This is connected to your essence and your belief system.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, if you are lactose intolerant or gluten intolerant or something along those lines, physiologically you cannot process those foods. And so we shouldn't be pushing like, you eat what I give you, right? You eat mac and cheese because that's what I'm choosing for you. And so
Right.
we ended up using that money to address gaps due to, uh, you know, like your ability to process food or,
Mm-hmm.
religious beliefs as well. And so it's not that the entirety of what we purchased was that, but it was about uniquely addressing gaps because we could. And that was kind of the essence of meal exchange. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then there was one layer further, which was, so now that we were addressing these unique gaps, there was also this premise that of like, how do you take a one-time uh, sort of social contribution and turn it into an ongoing relationship?
Right.
And the the idea was, well, if students not only donated, but actually took part in delivering the meal, so they understood what the
Mm-hmm.
organization was all about, who they serviced, and opportunities whereby they could continue their engagement, perhaps we could also act as a broker and
Mm-hmm.
connect students with ongoing volunteer opportunities in their adopted communities. And that was the first 2 years worth of meal exchange, that model.
Right.
That's how it came to be, which is just constantly thinking, like, what else can we do to be helpful?
That's wonderful. Well, I mean, we've come quite a long way, and I'm very interested to, firstly, to say, it's still quite remarkable how you were able to pull that all together. Not everybody is able to do something like that. So thanks for really, looking now at all the individuals that have been supported throughout the years. It's just really great that you were able to do that. And so, I think one of the questions that comes to mind, Rahul, is just that, a lot of times people romanticize this notion that students are, supposedly it's okay for students to be hungry. Can you talk about that? How do you feel about that?
So I mean, at its core, it's kind of a perverse premise. I don't think that going hungry is some admirable rite of passage. I know that colloquially there's this phrase that is sometimes used, the struggle is real. Mm-hmm. I think that is about effort, and it's also about choice. Like, if you choose to pursue a dream, like a legitimate dream, like you're trying to amend like your personal story or your family story in some material way, of course there is some level of hardship that is required. But education, I don't think education is even nearly in that realm. It is, if that were the case, we would feel the same way about elementary school students or high school students. And we don't. I think we feel like it is a right, particularly in Canada, that if you want to better yourself and learn, that we should facilitate that and we should embrace that. So this premise of it being a rite of passage to be hungry in school, I just think it nauseates me. I just don't think it's the right construct at all.
Right.
And what we're talking about isn't like people sitting down for fancy meals, or like engaging in like spending money on at restaurants. This is about nourishment and basic levels of sustenance, so that you're receptive to that learning both inside and outside of the classroom, right? That you are not making this really horrific trade-off between learning and trying to better yourself and thinking about your role in the world and wondering whether you will be able to eat today, or trying to battle between your stomach grumbling because you haven't consumed food in a sufficient enough period of time, and like being receptive to the learning in the classroom. So I just think it's just such a false premise, and one that I think needs to be banished from the way that we think.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're right. I mean, I appreciate what you said about the fact that this is our future, right? These are our young people who are going to be the next generation. These are the individuals who need to be receptive and open to really understanding and learning. And that comes from having nourishing meals, right? And, when we don't have that, there's so many impacts of that, whether it be on your mental health or on your ability to really focus. And so much of that, it's unfortunate people still think that that's just a common thing, right? That, oh, well, young people are going to just, deal with the macaroni and cheese and the peanut butter and bread type stuff, right? Whereas, one of the things that I think is really beautiful about Meal Exchange is this idea that we're really focusing on trying to get that good food and good food boxes and produce out to students, right? And really advocating even on campuses for that long-term shift around procurement of good food on campuses, so that, again, students are not only, big buyers and consumers on campuses in the sense of we have some power to actually buy, but they also can make choices that are actually meaningful, right? That are actually ethical and organic and focusing on local, local systems and things like that as well. So it's really great to, that you said that. I wanted to kind of switch gears a little bit here and talk a little bit about, what do you think, Rahul? Has our relationship in this sort of pandemic environment? Do you think our relationship to food has changed at all, or is changing?
I do. Yeah, I think it's changing quite considerably. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that food sort of runs this like our relationship with food runs this continuum from it being an annoyance or a chore, something that we have to do and is burdensome, to part of a material driver for what is good in the world, for enjoyment, for indulgence in some cases, and savoring. And I think we're shifting a bit more to that side of the continuum,
Mm-hmm.
because there are, like, this moment is forcing us to reflect on the little things that deliver an outsized impact. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think all of us are yearning to hug another human and be hugged by another human, to have that physical contact, because it's something that has been taken for granted. It's something small, but that is so critical to the human experience. And in a
Mm-hmm.
similar way, man, delicious food just delivers so much joy and pleasure, in addition to being, um, like, physically nourishing. And so I think in
Mm-hmm.
this moment where we feel physiologically threatened because there's the coronavirus, and this sense that touching other surfaces may get us sick,
Mm-hmm.
there's a we're more aware of threats, in a sense, or things that, um, compromise us. And so
Mm-hmm.
the contrast to that gives us some sense of control, is to be able to nourish ourselves, right? By eating nutrient dense foods, by
Mm-hmm.
eating things that will bolster our immune system and give us a better shot. And I think so that's like one continuum, which is feeling physiologically threatened and also wanting
Mm-hmm.
to drive some level of physiological nourishment. But then there's the emotional part, which is, it's hard for so many individuals. There's many people that have lost their principal form of employment. um,
Mm-hmm.
they're engaging in so many forms of stress, whether it has to do with homeschooling their children, whether it's not being able to care for their loved ones if they are a primary caregiver or even a secondary caregiver, not being able
Mm-hmm.
to engage with them with the same frequency, if at all, because we don't want to compromise their health. And so there's
Right.
all of this financial and emotional strain. And yet, like, food, it's not a salve for that or an antidote for it, but it certainly releases so much joy when we take a moment to stop and savor something delicious. We appreciate
Mm-hmm.
more the foods that are accessible to us because they're grown in our home province. Like, we don't take it for granted. I think there's
Mm-hmm.
also a much deeper appreciation for the people that are helping to make that possible. Everything
Right.
from understanding, the hard work and the love put in by farmers to grow and harvest those foods, and then all the people along the chain that deliver it to grocery stores, or to farmers markets, or that are coming up with new online versions of farmers markets. Just all of
Mm-hmm.
these people that are trying to say, well, how do we get the food from the farm to you? And then
Yes.
the people that we purchase it from. And they're all uh, playing such an important role in the ecosystem. But sometimes when you have a deeper appreciation for how something is made or how it comes about, it makes
Mm-hmm.
you appreciate how it tastes that much more, right? Or the
Mm-hmm.
role that it plays in your body, because it's no
Yes.
longer just this superficial thing. Now it's this, like, complex thing that, dozens of people have had a role, if not hundreds of people have had a role in bringing to you.
Right. Right. Well, that's beautiful. That's actually very nice. That's the way you put that. It's really nice to be able to be conscious of where the food is coming from, and who are, and all the quote love, right? That's being put into getting us the food, that sort of farm to table type notion, which is really beautiful. And so, have you been doing a lot of cooking lately?
I've been doing more cooking under quarantine than I've done in the entirety of my life. Um, so it is the probably the only materially healthy habit that I have adopted during quarantine. But it's been a joy, and what I've been trying to do is, in essence, satisfy my cravings. So to identify all the meals that I used to find a way to enjoy elsewhere, be it at
Mhm.
someone's home, like at my parents' house, or at restaurants, or with friends. And I'm trying to recreate those at home. And so I'm
Wow,
spending
very
an
cool.
inordinate amount of time in the kitchen.
That's wonderful. Well, we've got a few minutes to go, and I wanted to ask you. You are, I certainly am very inspired by our conversation. So I'm sure that there'll be a lot of students that'll be watching as well. And so I just am asking if you can tell us, what's some advice that you would give to some of the young people that are watching?
So sorry, I cut out a teeny bit, but I heard advice in young people.
Yes, advice in young people. Yes, sorry, it feels like we've got a bit of a technical issue going on. Go ahead.
But just advice in general.
Yeah, like to inspire students. What's your advice?
So I think, oh, there's so many things, and mainly because the older that I get, the greater appreciation I have of how little I know. Um, so I think there's a few things. The first is kind of connecting back to the meal exchange story. Um, there are there's I think we all experience challenges or problems or see problems on a daily basis, and more often than not we shrug, and I do it often, like, oh, that sucks, right? Or I'm really annoyed by that thing, or that situation, or that system. But I think this is just a magical opportunity to sit with that discomfort, to identify things that you're bothered by in the world or in your personal situation, and just sit with that discomfort for a moment and try and envision a scenario where you didn't have to deal with that point of friction, right? Or you
Mhm.
didn't have to deal with that problem, and sketch it out, right? Imagine that better scenario, and then plot out a course, almost like you were a writer in a story, to say, well, um, or like a Google Map kind of scenario, like, what are the steps that it would take for me to get from where I am and where we are as a society or a community, from our current problem state to that solution state. And mapping that out, I think, is just so interesting. And the thing is, it's not about getting it right, because you're not going to get it right. But it's really just about believing that you can conceptually map out steps between where you are and where you want to be, and just starting. Like, starting is 80% of of the challenge. And the greatest thing about starting is that it builds momentum, and it builds belief, right?
Mhm.
Builds confidence in ourselves that we can do so much more than we think we can. We're capable of so much more, um, and that no one really knows what the hell they're doing, right? There's all sorts of false, like a false sense that other people have it figured out. No one has it figured out. Everyone is just making it up as they go. And periodically they're presenting a narrative to the world that they actually know what's up and what's going on, and they have a plan. No one, no one does. We have a direction, and we're trying to figure it out, but we don't know what's up. So I guess that the principal piece of advice is that you are capable of so much more than you think, and chances are where that confidence will be built is by looking at problems that you're experiencing, problems that you observe, trying to envision a scenario where you solved it, and just starting with something, and you will figure out that whether you're alone or other people experience it as well, but just starting helps get the ball rolling towards that ideal end state.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Any last words for the audience in general?
I guess just a couple, or one last thing, which is, this moment in time it's heavy. There's so much that's happening, and you have every right to have all the feels that you are having. There is both. It's a lot. It's overwhelming. And there are some definite moments of joy and inspiration that are coming from, seeing the material responsibility that frontline workers are embracing on our behalf. They're putting themselves at risk and doing some extraordinarily important work so that we can be safe. And so it's a very overwhelming moment, but it's also a beautiful moment to re-envision the world and re-envision systems. The capital structure that we have in place, the inequality that currently exists, these are things that we shouldn't tolerate. They're not set up in the best interests of society. And we have the opportunity in this moment with this shared experience to say, we can do better. We can envision a more just and sustainable world. And there are choices that we can make on a daily basis to help make that possible. And so that's kind of the first thing. The second is that I'm so deeply appreciative of everyone that has donated to Meal Exchange to help us bring food, fresh produce boxes to students that have been displaced from residence, that don't have the financial means nor the family or friend support systems in place because their friends and family may live abroad or because of their personal circumstances. Many people feel alone and they don't have the financial means to eat. And everyone that has donated to help us bring fresh produce boxes on a weekly basis to over 500 students, I'm just so grateful for. We're trying to help generate enough funds to support 1,000 students across the country because the need exists. And so anything for those that are able to, any amount of contribution that you're able to make would help us help the students that are in need.
That's great. Thank you. Absolutely. And for those who are interested, you can go to goodfoodnow.ca and feel free to make a contribution. It's very easy. You can just pick the main sort of COVID, emergency fund, or you can pick a specific community that you're interested in donating towards. So thanks again, Rahul, for your time. We really appreciate you being on the show today. And thanks for all your heartfelt words and words of wisdom. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Frankie.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So that, okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for being on the show again. Looking forward to seeing you again next week. In the meantime, feel free to go to our YouTube page and watch some of the other shows that we've had before this. And we're excited to continue the conversation with you on Food is Life. Take care.